Moving to El Salvador was the best decision that I ever made, hands down. But I don't think it's the right decision for everyone. Hi, I'm Carol. I'm originally from California, but I've been living here in El Salvador for over 15 years. Originally, I came here for work, but I ended up staying for love when I met my Salvadoran husband, Carlos. Over the years, we built a family here, we've built a life here, we've built a home here. So everything I'm about to share with you today is not a theory, it's a lived experience. And while my story may look different from yours, I want to share it with gratitude and deep respect for this country and the amazing people that have always called it home. So grab a cup of coffee, sit with me, and let me tell you about all the things that I learned the hard way so you don't have to. These are the 10 things no one tells you about moving to El Salvador. So let's start with the obvious, language. And people do talk about language, but honestly, they don't talk about it enough. And I'm not talking about ordering food or reading a menu. Those things come pretty quickly. You learn them really quick or you starve. I'm talking about something deeper. If you want to build a life somewhere, to belong, to connect, to raise a family, to navigate everyday life, learning the language becomes essential. And I'm from the United States, but my husband, he's Salvadoran, and my daughters, they're Salvadoran. They were all born here. So if I wanted to be the partner, the mother, the person that I needed to be in this country, I needed to learn Spanish. And I'll be honest with you, even after 15 years, I still make mistakes in my Spanish every day. I am not perfect. I mess up at the supermarket, at the pharmacy, at my kids' school on a daily basis. I mean, heck, I once told a sales lady that I was pregnant when I meant to say that I was embarrassed. Yeah, embarazada does not mean embarrassed. That was embarrassing, you guys, but it's okay because messing up is part of the learning process. And it's okay to make mistakes while you're learning. And one of the beautiful things about El Salvador is no one has ever made me feel bad for speaking imperfect Spanish. I mean, if anything, people have just been super kind and encouraging just for trying. But at some point I realized something. Learning a language is not about survival. It's about connection, about belonging. It's about being able to step into a conversation instead of standing outside of one. Because when you move abroad, you're not just learning new words. You're building connection. You're building relationships. And if you want to build a real life somewhere, you have to build that on purpose. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and it does. But when you move to a foreign country, you don't bring a village with you. You have to build one. So for me, learning Spanish was never about perfection. It was about connection. Talking to doctors, to teachers, to neighbors, and eventually finding my people with the language I've always wanted to speak. And that's why I wanted to share one of the tools that I have used and that I still use on this journey. And that is italki. Italki is an online language learning platform where you can take one-on-one lessons with native speakers based on your level, your goals, and your schedule. And what I really love about it is that it's not classroom Spanish. It's a real conversation with a real supportive teacher who teaches at your level and creates a comfortable, safe space to learn.
¿Qué te gusta y qué no te gusta?
Me encanta español, me encanta El Salvador y entiendo más o menos, pero no puedo hablar mucho. Mi español es como queso, es mucho holes, like Swiss cheese.
Sí. Muchas cosas para mejorar.
Exactamente, exactamente. And listen, learning a new language is a lifetime journey. Even in your first language, no matter how articulate you may be, you're still constantly learning new words or remembering ones you may have forgotten along the way. I heard the word persnickety the other day. I hadn't heard that word in years, and suddenly it's back in regular rotation again. So remember, wherever you are in this language journey, give yourself a little grace. There's no need to be so persnickety. Aprender otro idioma no es fácil, pero sí es valiente. And with italki, you pay per lesson. There's no subscriptions or commitments. The learning is completely up to your budget and your schedule. You can learn anytime, anywhere, and choose from teachers all over the world. If you're raising kids abroad, planning a move, or just wanting to connect more deeply to another culture, this is one of my favorite ways to do it. And remember, 2026 is here. If learning Spanish or a new language was on your New Year's resolution, don't wait too long. Click the link in my description box and use my code EXPATMOM. Buy $10 and get $5 free for your first lesson. The discount's only available to the first 50 people, so hurry up grab it while it lasts. And truly, learning the language changes everything. Because once you're able to communicate, even imperfectly, the world around you starts to open up. The second thing that no one tells you about moving to El Salvador is that the cost of living here is complicated. Yes, we use the US dollar, but it doesn't mean that it stretches the same way here. Some things cost less, some things cost more, and some things cost about the same. So you can't compare it one-to-one, even though the currency is the same. Let's talk about rent. Many people are shocked to find out that rent here in El Salvador is comparable to a lot of cities in the United States. But I don't think it's fair to compare an apartment in Iowa to a tropical country where you're 30 minutes from the beach and surrounded by volcanoes and mountains and sunshine almost all year round. If you compare rent in El Salvador to places like Hawaii, California, or Florida, it starts to make more sense. Because in a way, we pay a sunshine tax too. And while this definitely wasn't the case when I first moved to El Salvador 15 years ago, and we'll talk more about that later, El Salvador is now one of the safest countries in the entire world. And that shift has impacted housing costs as well. Another thing that changes is how you spend your money. Going out to eat is mostly for birthdays or special occasions. Most families here cook their own meals at home. Most families shop at markets, and that alone completely shifts your budget. Even your morning coffee looks different. I don't go to Starbucks every day. I use a French press at home. But I do splurge on a bag of Salvadoran coffee beans at about $7 a pop, which Carlos thinks is excessive. But I rationalize because one entire bag of locally sourced, delicious coffee beans are less than one giant venti coffee at Starbucks. One person's luxury is another person's day-to-day life. There are areas that are often more affordable, like medical care, dental work, and personal services. But again, that's relative to local salaries. Context matters. And imported goods like peanut butter, makeup, and random comfort items can actually cost a lot more. But over time, you adjust. You stop trying to recreate your old life and start working on your new one. The biggest thing to understand is this. El Salvador uses the US dollar, but money works differently here. And you don't fully understand that until you start living it. Because cost of living is one conversation, but income, that's another. The third thing that no one tells you about moving to El Salvador is just how different the income reality feels. Because yes, we use the US dollar, but our salaries are not US salaries. And that changes everything. A lot of Salvadoran families live on minimum wage, living in multi-generational households, sharing rent costs, food costs, utilities, and they make it through together. But that's not the whole story. There's a strong middle class here too. Business owners, entrepreneurs, professionals, and yes, there's the really wealthy here too. The narrative that everyone in El Salvador is poor is simply not true. It's a lot more nuanced than that. If you're moving here as a foreigner, especially if you're not fully bilingual, the most common entry points are teaching English or working at a call center. Those are often the doors that open first. Everyone online talks about remote work, living here and earning a US salary. And yes, that exists, but it's far more competitive than social media makes it look. It's not as plug and play as people think. For me personally, I have never worked for a foreign company. I am a stay-at-home mom and content creator. And Carlos is a Salvadoran entrepreneur. Over the years, we've done a little bit of everything, from food delivery to teaching English to marketing to real estate. You figure it out. And honestly, if you can build something of your own here, that's usually the most sustainable path. Not just financially, but emotionally. Because when you build something inside the community that you live in, you're not just earning, you're contributing. So when you think about cost of living, you also have to think about income. Because money doesn't just work differently when you spend it. It works differently when you earn it too. And once you start navigating work, systems, and daily logistics, you start to realize something else very quickly too. The fourth thing no one really tells you about moving to El Salvador is how much paperwork is involved with moving here legally. And honestly, this applies to moving abroad anywhere. Because when you move to a different country, you're not just changing your address, you're entering an entirely different legal system. New rules, new processes, new timelines, and a whole lot of patience. When I first moved here, almost everything had to be done in person. Some things have improved over time. You can now do some online banking, pay some bills digitally, but honestly, most important processes still require that you be there physically. That means bringing copies, getting stamps, waiting in line, and often coming back another day. And visas are a big part of that reality. If you plan to live here long term, you need to understand residencies, renewals, legal requirements, and timelines. It's not impossible, but it does require organization and persistence. For me, this became very real when my daughters were born here. They were automatically Salvadoran citizens, but we needed to register them with the U.S. Embassy as U.S. citizens born abroad. That meant coordinating documents, translations, appointments, all while caring for a newborn. And something people don't often think twice about is that living between two countries often means doing everything twice. 2 birth certificates, 2 passports, 2 citizenships, 2 sets of paperwork, and yes, often 2 sets of fees. It can also mean double the responsibilities. For example, if you're a U.S. citizen living abroad, you still have to file your U.S. taxes, even if you don't live there anymore. That doesn't necessarily mean that you pay twice. There are exclusions and credits, but it does mean staying on top of 2 different systems in 2 different countries, and sometimes in 2 different languages. At first, it can feel like a lot. But over time, you learn the systems. You learn who to call, what to bring, and how to plan ahead. And once you start navigating all of that, you start to realize something else really quickly. Because moving abroad doesn't just change your paperwork, it changes your rhythm. The 5th thing that nobody tells you about moving to El Salvador is that daily life here often takes longer than you'd expect. Sometimes that's practical, and sometimes it's cultural. And nowhere do you feel this more than traffic. Sometimes it can take an hour just to drive a few miles here, especially right now. There are major infrastructure updates all over El Salvador, things that will eventually make life and driving much easier here. But in the meantime, they add a lot of time to your commute. Traffic here isn't philosophical, it's just real. So you learn to plan ahead, play music, and enjoy the ride. You go to the grocery store and run into someone you know, and suddenly you're having a full conversation in the aisle. You show up to a meeting and it may start 30 minutes later than planned. You walk into a room and you don't just wave, you hug everyone. Meals take longer, conversations go deeper, and goodbyes aren't quick. And at first, if you're used to doing things on your time, that can feel frustrating. People joke about it. They call it Salvadoran time. And no, it's not laziness. It's about valuing presence. Here, it's completely normal to talk about family before getting down to business. It's about connection. And once I stopped fighting that, stopped trying to compress every interaction into a schedule, something inside of me softened. And then there are the practical adjustments, like public water does not run all day, every day here in El Salvador. So most homes compensate by having what's called a cisterna, or a water reserve tank, and a pump, so you don't notice the disruption in your home. We also have backup jugs of water just in case. You learn the rhythm and you adapt. And power outages, while brief, are pretty common here, especially during the rainy season. So I make sure to always have some glow sticks on hand, so what used to feel like an inconvenience now feels like an excuse for an impromptu dance party in the dark. Over time, these things stop feeling dramatic, and they just start feeling normal. And once you adjust to the daily pace of life here, you start to notice something even deeper. Because moving abroad doesn't just change your schedule. It changes your cultural values that shape your everyday life. The 6th thing that no one tells you about moving to El Salvador is how deeply culture shapes daily life here. Not just in big, obvious ways, but in quiet, everyday expectations. And the biggest cultural shift for me personally, family. Growing up in the United States, I was taught that independence meant leaving home at 18. It wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. That's how you proved that you were strong. So when I moved out at 17, I thought I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. And in many ways, I did make it, but not without trade-offs. I dropped out of university after only my first semester because gas, groceries, rent, survival came first. There just weren't enough hours in a day to work, study, and stay afloat without family support. And I'm embarrassed to say that when I moved to El Salvador, I took that mindset with me. And I experienced the biggest culture shock of my life. Because kids don't leave the house at 18. They stay until they get married, or longer. Multi-generational families are common. It's not failure to launch, it's family. And I'll never forget something a Salvadoran once told me. Why would I wish hardship on my children? I want them to finish school, choose freely, and to know that their family is always here for them. And I'll tell you guys something, that changed me. That healed me. It changed how I see independence. It changed how I see resilience. And it changed how I plan to raise my own daughters. I will not be kicking them out at 18. Love can be the safety net. That isn't weakness. Another adjustment, warmth. And I'm not just talking the heat, though that is real. I am talking about the fact that in El Salvador, people greet you with hugs and kisses on the cheek. You make eye contact and you ask about someone's mom before starting business. And if you, like me, come from an efficiency-driven country, time is money, people, that can feel like a lot at first. But it isn't random, it's relational. And that relational culture shows up everywhere. You hear Buen Provecho from strangers in restaurants, people passing by that you don't even know. It's simple, but it reflects something deeper. It's a culture rooted in courtesy and acknowledgement and taking the time to wish someone to have a good day, even if you never see them again. And then there's the noise. This country is alive, from gas stations to school events to piñatas going late and even fireworks for no reason at all. I mean, do we really need a reason for fireworks? Not here in El Salvador, you don't. I mean, it's a Tuesday, firework. Life here is loud and it pours out onto the streets. And if you're not used to that, it can feel like a lot at first, but over time it just starts to feel like energy, like joy, like people fully living. None of this is better or worse than how I was raised. It's just different from the paradigms I grew up with. And different isn't wrong, it's just different. And it can be much, much better. Another thing that no one really prepares you for when you move abroad is how much your friendships will change. Because when you leave your home country, you don't just leave a place. You leave your everyday routines, your shared experiences, your inside jokes. And over time, even friendships that you thought would last forever can start to feel different. And not because anyone did anything wrong or because there's conflict, but because life continues to move on, even when you're not moving through it together.
Hi.
Hi, I love you.
I love you. Hello.
Hello. People get married, they have babies, they change jobs, and you change too. And time zones don't make it any easier. Schedules don't line up, and sometimes friendships don't end with a conversation. They just slowly drift apart. And that part can feel lonely. And not lonely as in I have nothing to do on a Friday night, but lonely in a quieter way. But here's the part that nobody talks about enough. If you stay long enough, if you keep showing up, if you put yourself out there, you will eventually meet your people. Maybe through work, maybe through school, maybe your kid's school, or maybe a class with a shared interest. And those friendships might look different than the ones that you had before. They may move more slowly and require more work and intentionality, but they're real. And over time, you learn something important about friendship that you didn't know before. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some people walk with you for a season, and that doesn't make that friendship any less meaningful. It just makes it human. And the eighth thing that no one tells you about moving to El Salvador is sometimes you don't just build a life here. You build a family that you never expected.
Like me. Speaking of family, can we get one more?
No. When I first moved to El Salvador, I didn't just fall in love with the country. I fell in love with a man and a little 2-year-old girl. Ari was already here. She was 2 when I came into her life, and loving her changed me long before I ever fell pregnant. Now, she is a mom that loves her very much, and I would never take that away from her story. But in many ways, she's my firstborn, and every aspect that truly matters. I didn't give birth to her, but I grew into motherhood through her. And I I have loved being her Carol for as long as we can both remember. Becoming a part of her life was not something I planned, but it was something that I chose. And that choice has shaped everything that has happened since. I love you, kiddo. Back in the United States, I was told that having children would most likely require medical intervention. I had endometriosis, and I had made peace with the fact that having children would probably not be part of my story. But 6 years into living here in El Salvador, I felt pregnant. To this day, I don't know what to credit this to, other than sunshine, clean food, a slower pace of life, and divine timing. I hadn't met my soulmate yet. El Salvador didn't just become my home. It gave me the family that I never thought I would have. And my daughters were all born here. They didn't move to El Salvador. This is the only reality that they have ever known. This is their culture, their language, their normal. And yes, they have dual citizenship. Yes, they have a connection to the United States, but this is their home. And raising kids abroad looks very different when it isn't abroad for them at all. My family didn't just grow through my children, it expanded in every direction because I lost my mom when I was 21 years old. And I haven't seen my dad or my brother in almost 9 years now. Plane tickets are expensive and schedules are complicated, and that's just the reality of living abroad. But here I gained a mother-in-law. Tias, tios, primos, primas, Sunday lunches, noisy birthday piñatas, hugs, warmth. My family didn't shrink when I moved to El Salvador. It transformed. At first, the constant hugs felt overwhelming and the closeness so unfamiliar until one day it didn't. Until one day I realized something. El Salvador didn't just give me a family. It taught me what family feels like. And after all that, after building a life, after building friendships, after building a family, there's something that nobody prepares you for when you move abroad. And it's not paperwork, it's not language, it's not cost of living. It's you. You will change. Not in loud, dramatic ways, but in quiet ones, because moving abroad has a way of slowly chipping away at the parts of you that thought you had it all figured out. One of the hardest mind shifts is letting go of the idea that the way you grew up with is the right way to do things. Because when you move to another country, you are not arriving somewhere that needs to be more like where you came from. You're stepping into a place that already has its own culture, its own history, its own rhythm, its own way of doing things. And at first that can feel uncomfortable because comparison is automatic. Well, where I'm from, we did it this way. Oh, well, where I'm from, that would never happen. But slowly, you begin to realize something. You didn't move abroad to recreate the life you left. You move abroad to grow into a new one. And that requires a sort of ego death that no one talks about. You have to be willing to be the one that's wrong, to be the one that doesn't understand, to be the one that asks questions, to be the one that feels out of place sometimes. And if you stay long enough, something beautiful starts to happen. You soften. You listen more. You become more careful with your words. You realize that the world is much bigger than the version that you grew up in. And it's not that you stop loving where you're from. As any mother can tell you, when you have more than one kid, your heart doesn't divide, it expands. And the same thing happens when you move abroad. But there's a quiet reality too, and that's that it can be very lonely. Lonely like you don't fully belong anywhere the way you once did. You don't fully fit into your birth country anymore, but you don't fully blend into your adopted home either. You exist in a sort of in-between space. And that in-between space, it changes you. And that's why I say this with love. Moving abroad is not for everyone. And not because El Salvador isn't beautiful, not because it's not full of heart, not because it isn't worth it, but because it requires something most of us were never taught how to do. It requires letting go. Over the past 15 years, I have seen many people come and go. Most make it 3 to 6 months. Some make it a year. Very few make it several. because moving anywhere is hard. But moving to another country, that's a whole other level of difficult. You have to be willing to let go of the idea that your way is the default. You have to be willing to be a guest. And you have to be willing to listen before speaking, to adapt before criticizing, and to respect what existed long before you arrived. And I also think it's important to say this, because just as you evolve as a human being, countries evolve too. And when I first came to El Salvador 15 years ago, it was known as the murder capital of the world. And the truth is, it wasn't safe for many Salvadoran families living here. I still remember decoy phones. I still remember rules that families live by to stay safe. And I still remember how different daily life felt. And even then, I loved this country because I could see the warmth of the people, the natural beauty, and the family values that have always lived here. And I remember wishing so deeply that it would be safe for those who deserved it the most. Because I just knew that if this country could ever become safe, it would flourish. And being here long enough to witness that transformation, to see El Salvador become what it is today, I feel honestly honored. And yes, privileged to have been able to witness that transformation with my own eyes. There is still progress to be made. There always is. Countries are constantly evolving, but I will never take for granted what it means to live in a country that is healing and growing in real time. And that's why I also want to say this with respect. I know not everyone had the choice to stay. I know many Salvadoran families had to leave to build safer, more stable lives for their children. That takes courage, and that deserves respect. My experience moving abroad was not the same as it was for many Salvadoran families. So if that's your story, if you had to leave, I just want to tell you, El Salvador is still here, still beautiful, still strong, still full of heart. And whenever you're able to come back, even if just for a visit, it'll be right here, waiting, growing, rooted in the hearts of the people who carry it with them wherever they go. And if you're thinking about moving abroad, whether it's El Salvador or anywhere else, I can't tell you if that's the right decision. Only you can know that. But what I can tell you is it was the best decision that I made in my entire life. Because I didn't come to El Salvador because I was mad at the United States or because I was running away from anything. I came for work and I stayed for love. And the funny thing about love is it doesn't divide, it expands. So if you do come with an open mind. Come with humility, come with gratitude, and prepare to be changed. Because this country will change you if you let it. And for me, it changed everything. Y por eso, gracias, El Salvador. Muchísimas gracias.